So we talked about the scale of a servant being able to completely remove themselves from the throne of heroes. And another thing somebody brought up in that video was, well, what does this mean for Saber and Shirou, who ended up going to Avalon? Which has literally nothing to do with each other, by the way. But I guess if you just wanted to talk about it, we are already on the topics of layers of the world and time, since we haven't really touched upon him being able to make it over there at all, really. And this is based on the bonus segment in Fate last episode, where after the Fate route, Shirou goes over into Avalon to meet up with Saber as his final wish and as her final wish. The problem is, he has no means of getting there, and even if he did, he wouldn't even know how. That is until Merlin ends up getting involved, and he has always been seen as the person that would lead the way for Shirou in order to pay homage to both of them, because they desperately wanted this to happen so badly. This is difficult. Your times are so far apart that the distance makes people despair. Merlin said so. The realization of that dream was pretty much impossible. If you want to meet again as normal people, two miracles must occur. One must wait continuously, that being Saber, and one must pursue endlessly, that being Shirou. They must realize that it is impossible to succeed, yet at the same time be capable of enduring patiently. Is that the story of a dream that shouldn't be waited upon? Is that sort of thing possible? It's unrelated to the duty of the king. It's as simple as whether or not it can come true and whether or not you can keep waiting for it. In the end, his way of life has not changed. As for repaying Saber, it did not happen. And then to Saber and Shirou, a long time had passed. So it poses the idea that in order for this to occur, at least in their case, it was literally a circumstance that couldn't happen. No matter how much they wanted it to, realistically, if Shirou was stuck doing this by himself, he wouldn't have been able to pull it off. But with the intervention of Merlin being there, him setting things up with Saber's wish in order to cause this sort of blip in reality, and we all know that Shirou isn't going to give up anyway, that's just a part of his character. Again, they never tell us how long it is, but from the way that it's written, it comes off as if it was at least multiple years, a good portion of his life. Softly, eyes open. How far have I actually come? I've clearly chosen the barren earth, yet I've penetrated the dense forest to stand in this grassland that makes me nostalgic. So this is Shirou awakening in Avalon itself. And by the way, when we talk about Avalon here for the FGO only guys, this is strictly the OG Avalon, pan-human history Avalon. So this has nothing to do with LB6 at all entirely. Shirou is bringing up the fact that he essentially was unconscious and just ended up in Avalon. But the place that he was in before was barren earth, which in most scenarios is often just a desert. We know that in this particular point in the story right now, this is the transition between Shirou after Stay Night and before Shirou made his contract to become Emiya. So he's not Emiya yet. He's still walking around with his new EOS attire, but at this point in the story, depending on which version you do look at, he would be in the Middle East, which you can find a lot of barren earth, a lot of deserts, which we've seen depictions for this even in the show itself quite a few times when he is making this pursuit to find himself, even when he's not going to Avalon. Another thing to look at is how he said it makes him feel nostalgic, but we all know Shirou has never stepped foot into Avalon, not one time, as far as his original self goes. And this is more so of a nod to him having Avalon in his body his entire life, so he has that natural affinity to it. Whether he went there or not, it's only natural for him to feel at home just being there. If there was anybody that would be in tune with Avalon, he would be one of those people. That's why you have a lot of people saying that if he had mystic eyes, they should be fairy eyes because of that exact affinity, things like that. I cannot be certain of this place. How long has passed since then? How far have I traveled? It's still very blurry. Putting down the heavy burden carried on his shoulders, letting the tense body rest, I thought this long journey would continue forever. It looks like the journey will end here. And then it flips over to Saber. She gives her perspective on the situation in the same sort of fashion, in alignment with Merlin telling her to wait on him. And as you can see, Shirou eventually ends up reuniting with Saber in Avalon. The impossible wish ended up coming true. By the way, Avalon is said to be in the reverse side of the world, which in his case, like I mentioned before, there's the spiritual tomb of Albion, or you would just have to have somebody open up a dimensional rift in order for you to get there, or have some type of affinity for you to get there from the actual location where Avalon existed. We've been over that also. The reverse side of the world is exactly the way it sounds. So wherever you are in the real part of the world and the reverse side of the world, it would be the same area, but that area would be based upon whatever the reverse side entails. In the real world, Avalon is said to be in Glastonbury over in Europe. So ideally, one of the methods to get over there would to be at least to get to Glastonbury and then find a way to make that shift into the mythical place itself. That's literally what happened to Saber when she left. Now there is a manga that is based on these very events. It's a manga that covers the last episode in greater detail. It's a one-shot, and it's a lot like the Tsukihime Fate collab, where it's recognized by Type Moon, but it's not necessarily the official interpretation. It would just be the interpretation of the artist that did it. In this case, that artist is Nakatani. And in the manga, their interpretation is that Merlin being involved to begin with ended up just teleporting Shirou there after a certain period of time. A heart of steel is proof of 10. Even if no one understood, I would have been happy to have some reward from time to time. In the end, he couldn't change his way of life, and she would never be recompensed, exactly like it was from the novel as we just saw. Don't worry about that. It was decided from the beginning that that had to happen. From the beginning, there was nothing to cry about. I admired beautiful things. Beautiful things are everywhere. I didn't see the shine of the stars I left that day, but it was a satisfying life. And so this is what I mean about Shirou being in this transitionary state. You can see that he already has his holy shroud and he's changed into the black fit. His skin is already deteriorated and he has the white hair. So it indeed has been a good amount of time. This isn't something just right after the series ended, but at this point it's showing us a stage of him essentially tapping out, like he's given all that he has, and right at that point where he falls unconscious, he falls into a dream. You know, Merlin's an incubus, so he is the authority over dreams, and once he falls unconscious into the dream, Merlin gets involved. I see. So that equally stubborn herself defeated. You are. Shirou is now starting to recognize who he is. I'm not a person to whom one gives a name. You can call me Brother of Flowers. I already got the reward. It's for you and her. In this kind of moment, what should I say? Ah, that's right. Take care of her. And you can see Shirou is in a state where he's kind of being blown away, and you can kind of just look at him and tell that he's been through it, but you can see his eyes widen open in ways that you can tell he hasn't seen in a very long time. Once he realizes that what Merlin just did actually took him there, and he immediately goes into those same portions in the novel where he does in fact meet up with Saber because of Merlin's influence. Now, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. As we've already seen, the way I imagined it in the artist's interpretation of the scene is a lot different. It comes off as a lot more simple because when you interpret the text, he literally said it takes a very long time, so it makes it feel like exactly like he said, forever. So he had to work really hard for it. So the idea of Merlin just pulling up and teleporting him there anyway, it almost gives off the sense that he could have done that at any point if he was going to just do do that anyway. So I do like that more in the sense of, you know, paying homage to his character in the sense that he always works hard for what he does. Even in this scenario, walking to the ends of Earth with no way of getting to this alternate dimension, but he's gonna find a way how. It sounds just like him. It's hard to say what my interpretation is in fully because I never really gave that much thought to it to begin with. You know, it was always, well, I'm sure he devoted a lot of time to figuring out a way to open that rift in particular. Now that I'm actually doing the video itself, you know, looking at some of the characters, even if they're from different timelines, it doesn't seem like that should be something that's incapable for Shirou, even if he does have to go through a lot of hoops and hurdles in order to get there. Betty got there, Drake got there, and that's on record. So the idea of somebody like him not being able to get there, it really was only just a matter of time, especially when he's somebody that's had Avalon inside of him since he was a child. And so when I look at it, I would have liked to have believed that he went to Glastonbury after a very long time, and he kind of used the ability of Avalon itself to throw himself into the reverse side, if that makes any sense. Because I mentioned already, the very effect of Avalon as an armament is that it's temporarily taking the person using it to Avalon. So it's not really a stretch at all to say Shirou, being one of the proper wielders, would be able to do the same thing except with himself. It would probably, again, just take a long time for him in order to do that because that's not the normal method of using the armament. And you might be thinking, well, he doesn't even have the real thing, but you got to remember, Avalon is in fact one of the only things that he can make a 1-1 copy of because of that long time relationship. So he might as well have the real thing even if he doesn't have it. The projection is going to be perfect. It's going to be a perfect replica. But here's an issue that I kind of find even with my own interpretation is that, well, it's the same issue as Merlin just teleporting him there. If he was just going to go to Glastonbury to throw himself into Avalon, then he should have just been able to do that anyway, because he could make a perfect replica of Avalon in the story. This isn't even something that he had to build up to. So it shouldn't have taken him a long time or something that essentially feels like forever in order for him to do it regardless. So I'm looking at that too. There's also the fact that he blatantly said he was in barren earth, so he couldn't have been in Glastonbury going by the context itself. What's much more likely is that Merlin, being this arbiter of the dream realm, established some type of a connection between him and Artoria that had to be set up beforehand in order for it to work. And he's not the only person that is an arbiter of dreams. We've seen a ton of people like Edmund, for example. There's a ton of things that you can do in the dream realm that deserves a video in its own right, but what might seem unrealistic becomes the reality if you put those things into place. And that feels a lot like what happened here. Merlin sets this up beforehand. Shirou falls unconscious and lands into the dream realm. Technically, he should be dying there. He even speaks as if that's what's happening. Saber falls unconscious and lands into the dream realm, and Merlin mixes those realities to make them become a real thing, something that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, usually, as he already mentioned. I can see it happening that way. The thing about Shirou, and this is probably the hardest part of the bargain, is that he would most likely have to be on the brink of death since he's actually in the real world. So him falling unconscious was likely him about to die, and that's the exact point where Merlin could step in and take advantage, because he said he feels like he's been walking forever. So this dude has literally been walking the world more than likely. He's been walking to the ends of earth in the most literal sense, and he's likely walked so long that his mind has kind of defaulted him back to his original purpose. And back in his original purpose, he would be in the Middle East. His mind is willing, but his body is likely about to die out. So he does die out. He goes into limbo, and that's how we get the situation that we have here. If there were ever to be be any elaboration to it, I still would like to know in great detail how that works. And again, I see that they mention wishing upon a star, and Merlin is an arbiter of the stars. Metaphorically, that's a part of where his ability comes from, that clairvoyance of him being able to see all of the world. And by the way, if you go back to the FGO Memorial movie where he's sitting in front of the stars, it literally tells you in plain sight, among other places,